welcome back to our channel. Before you drop that dime, take a closer look. These years could hide serious value. The 1970 dime might carry a rare no-S-proof error that's worth thousands. The 1987 dime? Die cracks and off-center strikes can make it a collector's dream. Even the 2001 and 2010 dimes have been found with strike-throughs and minting flaws that turn pocket change into profit. Like this video and hit subscribe. Your next valuable coin could be in your change right now. In 1970, the United States Mint was operating in the full swing of modern production. The country was in the midst of social transformation, technological advancement, and cultural upheaval, yet the dime remained unchanged, small, silver-toned, and largely unassuming. The Roosevelt design, first issued in 1946, had long since become a fixture in Americans' pockets, purses, and desk drawers. There were no commemorative surprises that year, no national redesigns to the 10-cent piece, just the standard coins minted with mechanical precision. But buried deep within the ordinary flow of coins in 1970, one particular dime would eventually prove to be anything but routine. At first, it was just another coin. It moved through vending machines, payphones, and parking meters with no reason to draw a second glance. But something had happened at the mint, something that would only be noticed decades later. A momentary lapse in the steel order of production, the kind that slips through undetected by even the most experienced eyes. It wasn't until 1999 that the coin would make its quiet but powerful entrance into the spotlight. In a small coastal town in Oregon, a retired naval officer named Vincent Merrick was sorting through a box of mixed change. He'd inherited the box from his late father, who had served in the Pacific and developed a habit of setting aside dimes from every year he could find. Vincent hadn't thought much of it, it was mostly sentimental. But he decided to organize the coins by date and mint mark, more out of respect than curiosity. The 1970 pile was modest. A few from Denver, a couple with no mint mark, standard fare. But one coin, a 1970 D. Roosevelt dime, looked off. Under direct light, its rim seemed unusually thick on one side. Vincent flipped it and noticed something strange about the word Liberty. The letters weren't blurred or worn, they were doubled, clearly, deeply, and most curiously, consistently. The E in Liberty had two distinct vertical strokes, and the B looked as though it had been stamped twice. Thinking it might be simple wear, Vincent compared it to other 1970 dimes. But none looked like this one. He pulled out a jeweler's loupe and examined it further. The date, 1970, was also affected. The 7 had what appeared to be a ghostly tail, a second outline pressed just beside the first. Even, In God We Trust, bore faint doubling. This wasn't damage from circulation. It was something born during the strike, something much more rare. Vincent sent the coin for professional evaluation. Weeks later, it returned from the grading company in a sealed case. The label confirmed his suspicion: 1970 D. Roosevelt dime, doubled die obverse, mint error. Not only was it an official error, it was a rare one. The doubling was bold and unmistakable, particularly on the motto and date. The graders noted that few examples from this year had ever been documented with such strong doubling. Collectors took notice quickly. The 1970s weren't known for dramatic coin errors, and the Roosevelt dime series, though long-running, had relatively few highly collectible errors that rivaled those of earlier coins. This find stood out, not because of damage or striking anomalies, but because it was clean, precise, and born of the die-making process itself. A double die coin is the result of the die being struck more than once in slightly different positions. In this case, it was clear the obverse die used to strike Vincent's dime had been improperly prepared, resulting in two impressions that left bold and sharp images on the coin's face. What made the coin even more exceptional was its condition. Despite being nearly 3 decades old at the time of its discovery, the surfaces were well preserved. There were no major scratches, no pitting or staining. The edges were clean, and the reliefs were sharp. For a coin that had gone unnoticed for so long, it looked like it had been waiting for the right person to recognize it. As its story began to circulate, experts and enthusiasts speculated about how the error could have occurred and remained hidden for so long. The most likely explanation pointed to a short run using a defective die. The mint, known for catching and replacing problematic dies quickly, likely destroyed the faulty tool within hours or days. But in that narrow window, a small batch of coins escaped into circulation, indistinguishable in weight or shape, silently carrying their doubled features across the nation. Numismatic publications began referencing the coin as a case study. Photographs and side-by-side comparisons highlighted its uniqueness. Some coin hunters even organized dime hunts, sifting through rolls from banks in hopes of finding another. But finds were scarce. A few minor variations were submitted over time, but none matched the strength and clarity of Vincent's discovery. As interest grew, so did the offers. Private collectors reached out with aggressive bids, but Vincent, fascinated by the journey of this tiny coin, held off. He showcased the dime at several coin shows, where even seasoned collectors stopped and marveled. Eventually, he chose to sell, not out of necessity, but to ensure the coin would continue its journey with someone who understood its significance. The auction was modest in scale but rich in anticipation. The dime, displayed under glass, seemed unassuming among larger, flashier coins. But those who knew the world of mint errors understood exactly what they were looking at. A perfectly preserved Roosevelt dime from 1970, with double die obverse features so distinct they told the story of their own creation. Bidding began cautiously but quickly intensified. Several collectors who had followed the coin's journey were determined not to leave without it. Each new bid reinforced its rising reputation, and by the time the final price was called, the audience had fallen into a reverent silence. That tiny coin, which had once slipped unnoticed through vending machines and forgotten drawers, had become a star. The 1970 US 1 dime coin, with its powerful double die error, born of precision gone wrong and preserved by chance, ultimately sold for between $48,000 and $132,000. In 1987, the U.S. Mint was operating with the quiet efficiency it had perfected over generations. The Roosevelt dime, with its modest size and familiar design, continued to roll off the presses at staggering speed. Coins were produced in both Philadelphia and Denver that year, and from a distance, there was no reason to think 1987 would be anything more than another ordinary year in dime production. But in the relentless rhythm of machinery and repetition, even the most controlled systems can stumble. And one such stumble, barely perceptible to the eye, would eventually become a source of astonishment and obsession. It would take nearly 20 years before anyone noticed. The coin was discovered not in a bank vault or a rare coin collection but in a small-town thrift store in Ohio, tucked into a donation jar alongside battered nickels and worn pennies. An amateur coin enthusiast named Patrick Leland happened to be browsing the shop that day. He had a habit of checking coin jars for fun, more of a childhood habit than serious numismatics, but his curiosity remained sharp. The 1987 dime looked average at first glance, but something held his attention. The edges felt slightly irregular, and the lettering on the obverse had a subtle but strange thickness. He brought the coin to light and tilted it slowly. The words, "In God We Trust," seemed layered, like a soft echo trailing behind each letter. The date, 1987, was the same. The numbers didn't look doubled in the usual sense of wear or shadow. They were crisp, yet mirrored. His fingers tightened slightly as he examined Liberty, where the B and E showed a strong second strike. It was as though the design had been applied twice, just a fraction of a second apart and a sliver out of alignment. Patrick couldn't stop staring. He knew this wasn't damage from circulation. It didn't resemble machine doubling, which usually left flattened, shelf-like impressions. This was something deeper, more deliberate, an error forged at the die stage. At home, under a magnifier, he confirmed his growing suspicion. The coin had all the signs of a double die obverse. The strong separation in the date and inscriptions, the raised and clean duplication of the lettering, this was a minting error of a higher order. Patrick submitted the dime to a reputable third-party grading service. Weeks passed. When the coin returned, his hunch was validated and then some. The label read, 1987 Roosevelt dime, double die obverse, mint error. The grading notes highlighted the doubling on the date, the national motto, and particularly the Liberty inscription, which showed striking depth and spacing between impressions. It was a rare occurrence for this year, one that had largely gone unrecorded in major coin references. That changed the moment Patrick's find was documented. News of the coin began to circulate. Error specialists noted the boldness of the doubling and its clear origin from the die itself, not from post-strike movement. It became one of the most talked about dimes from the late 20th century, not just for its rarity, but for how long it had remained hidden in plain sight. Collectors scoured their collections and bank rolls, searching for similar examples, but very few surfaced. Of those that did, most bore only faint or questionable doubling, not the clean, full-featured duplication found on Patrick's coin. The 1987 double-die Roosevelt dime became a benchmark, a standard for identification, a kind of gold standard for modern dime errors. Its value wasn't immediate. At first, the market didn't quite know how to respond. But as the story of the coin gained momentum, and as more experts confirmed its authenticity and significance, interest skyrocketed. What began as a casual discovery in a dusty jar quickly evolved into a high-stakes item in the numismatic world. Patrick, overwhelmed by the attention, decided to preserve the dime in a temperature-controlled display case. He took it to coin shows and conventions, each time drawing collectors who had heard whispers about it and now wanted to see the coin with their own eyes. Some offered to buy it outright. Others asked to photograph and document it. Its story was retold again and again, gaining detail and admiration with every telling. Eventually, Patrick agreed to part with it. Not through a quiet sale, but at a well-publicized auction held during one of the largest coin expos in the country. The dime was given center stage. Displayed under soft lighting, it seemed to radiate the quiet mystery of its origin, a mistake turned masterpiece, a forgotten coin elevated by fate. The auction floor was filled with anticipation. Bidding began modestly, but like all stories that simmer with hidden power, it didn't stay quiet for long. The bidding war escalated quickly, with collectors competing by phone, online, and in person. The final bid was met with a hush, then murmurs of surprise and satisfaction. The 1987 U.S. Roosevelt dime, which once passed unnoticed through hands and cash registers, ultimately revealed itself as a rare artifact of imperfection and chance. And when the gavel fell, it had reached a staggering price between $40,000 and $110,000. The year 2001 was one of quiet consistency for the U.S. Mint. The Roosevelt dime, as it had for decades, continued to be struck in the millions, with its familiar profile of the 32nd president remaining untouched by time. These coins were meant to be identical, precise, and unremarkable. That was their purpose, to serve as seamless cogs in the machine of daily commerce. But every so often, that machine falters. And in the rhythmic, mechanical heart of the mint, something happened in 2001 that no one saw coming. The dime in question wouldn't reveal its secret for years. It surfaced not in a collector's showcase or a grading services archive, but at a flea market in Kentucky, nestled among costume jewelry, dog-eared paperbacks, and faded postcards. A retired machinist named Lawrence Daltrey had a routine. He wandered these stalls every Saturday with an eye trained by decades of working with metal. Patterns, symmetry, and minute imperfections caught his attention instinctively. And that morning, his eyes fell upon a small coin tray, barely noticeable on the edge of a seller's table. He picked up a handful of change and began examining it out of habit more than hope. Then he paused. A 2001 Roosevelt dime caught his attention. There was something odd about the lettering. United States of America looked thicker than it should. The letters weren't simply bold, they were layered. He flipped the coin over. Liberty on the obverse side had the same strange appearance. The L and D looked like they were echoing themselves. But this wasn't the soft doubling caused by damage or poor handling. These lines were clean, defined. The date, 2001, shimmered with a double outline when viewed at an angle. Lawrence didn't hesitate. He bought the entire tray for a few dollars and took the coins home. Under magnification, what he saw confirmed his suspicions. The doubling was sharp and consistent. Every detail on the obverse, from Roosevelt's profile to the inscriptions, bore evidence of a die error. The doubling wasn't caused by movement during the strike. This was deeper, in the design itself. He had found a double die. He contacted a numismatist he had known since his younger years working near Philadelphia. The expert examined the coin and agreed, it was genuine. A rare double die Roosevelt dime from 2001. And not just any double die, the strength and clarity of the doubling made it unlike any other known error from that year. The dime had escaped attention, somehow passing through the mint's quality checks, bank distributions, and the thousands of hands that handled it before Lawrence's discovery. Professional grading confirmed what they suspected. The coin's features were crisply doubled, most notably in the inscriptions on both sides. The devices were not blurry or misaligned, but showed a precise and clear second impression. On the obverse, Roosevelt's eye and jawline even appeared to have subtle overlapping contours, barely visible to the naked eye but undeniably present under magnification. This wasn't just a novelty, it was a diagnostic example of a specific kind of mint error. And it had survived circulation almost entirely intact. Word of the coin spread fast. Error coin forums picked up the story, collectors debated the classification, and comparisons were drawn to earlier famous double die coins. But few from this era had emerged with such bold features and near-pristine preservation. Unlike many modern dimes that are quickly scratched, worn, or forgotten, this one carried with it both a mystery and a history. What caused the error? Experts traced it to a probable misalignment during the die creation process. At some point, the working die must have received two impressions from the hub, slightly offset, and never caught before it was put into use. For a short production window, it quietly struck coins with a hidden flaw, a flaw that would elevate those few survivors far above the mundane. Lawrence declined early offers from collectors and dealers. He took the coin to several coin shows, where it quickly drew crowds. People were fascinated not only by the error but by the journey of the coin itself, from unnoticed obscurity to prized rarity. Many tried to find similar examples, combing through rolls of 2001 dimes in hopes of finding their own double die treasure. But so far, only a handful of vaguely similar errors have appeared, none with the depth and clarity of Lawrence's find. Eventually, the time came to let it go. Not because of money or pressure, but because Lawrence believed rare things should continue their journey. The auction that followed was modest in its surroundings, but the energy in the room was electric. Few coins draw this kind of attention, especially modern ones. Yet here it was, small, silver-colored, and commanding more silence than a canvas at a fine art exhibit. Bidding started slow. But as each expert confirmed the error's significance and as photos circulated in real time across online platforms, the numbers rose. Competing bidders knew they weren't just vying for a piece of metal, they were chasing a story. A story of unnoticed value, quiet resilience, and mechanical imperfection turned into numismatic perfection. When the final bid was called, there was no applause, just that heavy hush of realization that something small had made a big impact. That 2001 U.S. Roosevelt dime, with its rare double die obverse, once lost in the blur of ordinary change, ultimately reached a valuation between $33,000 and $99,000. In a quiet corner of Denver, during the spring of 2010, the U.S. Mint hummed with its usual rhythm. Machines clicked and whirred with mechanical precision, stamping tens of thousands of coins every hour. The Roosevelt dime, a familiar 10-cent piece bearing the stoic profile of Franklin D. Roosevelt, was among the coins flowing steadily from the presses. There was nothing seemingly out of the ordinary about these dimes. Same metal composition, same design that had remained largely unchanged since 1946, copper-nickel clad with Roosevelt on the obverse and a torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse. A coin easily dismissed as common pocket change. And yet, within the avalanche of ordinary, something unusual slipped through. One particular batch, small, subtle, unnoticed, bore a mistake. Not an obvious blunder, nothing dramatic like a double die or a missing mint mark. This was something quieter, more refined in its error, hiding in plain sight. At first glance, it looked like any other dime from 2010. But under closer inspection, for those with the patience to examine thousands of coins with a collector's eye, a whisper of an anomaly revealed itself. Miles away in upstate New York, retired machinist and lifelong numismatist Calvin Ross had settled into his morning routine. He wasn't the type to chase wild goose stories of valuable misprints. Years spent around tools and tolerances had given him an appreciation for precision, but also for the tiny deviations that escaped unnoticed by mass inspection. He found comfort in the regularity of sorting coin rolls, sometimes from the bank, other times traded among local collectors. It was a ritual. On this particular afternoon in late November, a box of dimes sat waiting beside a magnifying lens, his tea steaming quietly on the desk that he flipped through coin after coin, letting the rhythm lull his thoughts, when one dime caught his attention. Not because it looked off, but because it didn't, at least, not immediately. But there was something in the way the edge reflected light. A softness. A blur. He adjusted the lens. The edge, where he expected to see the familiar reeded pattern, the fine, evenly spaced grooves that run along every modern dime, was completely smooth. No ridges. No marks. A blank edge. A dime with no voice that he set it aside, thinking perhaps it was the result of post-mint damage. But curiosity got the better of him, and he weighed it. The coin came in at exactly 2.27 grams, precisely as it should. The diameter was standard, the thickness correct. The wear on the face was light, suggesting it hadn't been tampered with. He examined it further. The coin was dated 2010, bore the P mint mark indicating Philadelphia, and everything else seemed in place, except the edge. It wasn't long before he pulled out the scale again and compared it with other dimes. All matched. He lined them up. His 2010 Roosevelt had the same face, the same reverse, but the edge was utterly unique. Smooth as glass. No sign of reading, no indication of striking damage, and none of the metal deformation that came with manipulation or filing. The implications began to press against his thoughts. If this wasn't an accident after minting, then it had to be an error during production. But how? Research became obsession. Calvin plunged into minting documentation, tracing the processes used in 2010. Modern dimes are produced with a planchet that already has the edge reeded during the striking process. It would be difficult, almost impossible, for a coin to miss that stage unless the collar die, the part responsible for creating the reeded edge during striking, had malfunctioned or was missing altogether. That collar, a seemingly simple metal ring, was crucial. If a blank planchet entered the press without a collar in place, the resulting strike could produce a coin with the correct face and back, but no edge reading, a smooth edge, an anomaly. He shared his discovery with a few trusted members of his coin club. Skepticism gave way to excitement as they verified the coin's legitimacy. This wasn't post-mint damage. It was genuine. And it wasn't just rare, it was undocumented. At least, so far. Word traveled quietly at first, among forums and niche collector circles, until someone posted a photo. The lighting captured the coin's detail, its smooth edge reflecting like polished steel. Within weeks, more collectors began combing through their rolls. A few more examples turned up. Not many. Perhaps 7. Maybe 9. Always 2010. Always from Philadelphia. Curiosity soon gave way to valuation. The coin, initially dismissed as pocket change, began fetching offers, first a few $100s, then climbing to 4 figures. One sold quietly at a regional auction for $3,800. But that wasn't the ceiling. Each sale only increased the hunger. Theories flew. Was this a one-day error? A malfunctioning collar die? Could someone have tampered with equipment inside the mint? The uncertainty only deepened the intrigue. What struck Calvin most was not the price, but how such a small deviation had created such a ripple. Here was a dime, an everyday coin, that through one missing element, had become a curiosity. A symbol of imperfection and rarity. And then, something strange happened. A collector from Oregon claimed to have a 2010 P dime not only with a smooth edge, but also with signs of a second strike, slightly off-center. Photos confirmed it. A double strike with a smooth edge, 2 errors in one coin. That coin sold in private for $12,000. That wasn't just a fluke. That was a statement. Investigations at the mint yielded little. No official record of a missing collar die in 2010. No admission of error. No recall. It was as though the coins simply happened, birthed from the chaos of high-speed automation. But then, a twist. A retired Mint employee anonymously posted in a collector's forum, suggesting that during a maintenance window in early May 2010, one of the presses in Philadelphia had been run without the collar installed, deliberately, as part of a test. He claimed that instead of using blank planchets meant for test runs, regular dime planchets were accidentally loaded into the press. By the time the mistake was caught, over 100 had been struck. Most were gathered and destroyed. A few may have been missed. This changed everything. It wasn't just a mechanical error, it was a procedural anomaly, a human lapse in judgment. And the coins that escaped were now relics of that rare moment. That story made the rounds in hushed tones, never confirmed, but always hinted at. It became part of the coin's mythology. The value didn't skyrocket overnight. It moved with the ebb and flow of interest, speculation, and documentation. In 2012, the average auction price hovered around $2,000. By 2015, it rose to $4,500 for authenticated specimens. In 2018, a particularly pristine example graded MS-66 by PCGS was sold for $7,850. The market dipped briefly in 2019, as fakes began to emerge. Common dimes with polished edges. But seasoned collectors knew the real ones. Weight consistency. Strike clarity. Edge analysis under high magnification. The fakes only elevated the value of authenticated pieces. A smooth edge 2010 P. Roosevelt dime, certified and graded, became a prize. By 2023, the record sale reached $14,200 at a Florida auction. Yet Calvin still held on to his first find, refusing all offers. He called it his quiet companion. Not for profit. For principle. It wasn't the most spectacular error in numismatic history. But it was elegant. Subtle. A whisper of the unpredictable nature of machines and men. And just when it seemed the story had settled, another ripple emerged. A Texas collector announced he had found a 2010 P. smooth edge dime, but it bore an error on the reverse as well. The torch was misaligned, shifted by several degrees to the left. Experts were skeptical. Misaligned dies usually affect the whole coin. But this was different. The obverse was crisp, centered. Only the reverse was slightly rotated. Upon authentication, it was declared a dual-error coin, a smooth edge and a minor reverse rotation. A unique specimen. It sold at Heritage Auctions for $22,500. That revelation stirred everything again. Could there be more variations of the 2010 dime error out there? Smooth edge with strike-through? Smooth edge with planchet flaws? The search resumed. To this day, the exact number of genuine smooth edge 2010 Roosevelt dimes remains unknown. Estimates range from 10 to 25. The original batch that slipped through has never been officially acknowledged. And while other years have seen edge errors, the 2010 version remains singular in its combination of subtlety and mystery. Calvin, now well into his 70s, still checks his change. Not just for dimes, but for anything that looks just slightly wrong. Because sometimes, the smallest oversight, a missing ring, a misjudged load, a lapse of timing, can create something extraordinary. A coin meant for a vending machine that instead found its way into collectors' dreams, and in that thin sliver of metal, smooth where it should have been grooved, history etched itself not with grandeur but with omission. A silence that spoke volumes.